In our most recent video, we talked about the ongoing legal drama between Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni, and more specifically, the dismissal of Baldoni's complaint against Lively and all of the judge's main reasons for dismissing each claim. And in it, Judge Lyman said that essentially all but 2 of these claims were dismissed without leave to amend. This means Baldoni and the other Wayfarer parties can't just amend these claims and try to bring them again. They are essentially gone for good in this lawsuit under the facts that are currently known to both sides at this moment. And so a lot of people have been talking about how this is a devastating blow to Justin Baldoni's case against Blake Lively. But I'm here to tell you that there is still plenty of lawsuit left in this case. And actually, at the risk of sounding like Navy SEAL bro Jocko Willink,
one of my direct subordinates, one of my guys that worked for me, he would call me up or pull me aside with some major problem, some issue that was going on. And he'd say, boss, we got this and that and the other thing. And I'd look at him and I'd say, good. Oh, mission got canceled? Good. We can focus on another one.
This dismissal might actually result in some pretty surprising benefits to Justin Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties. So in this video, I'm going to explain why I personally think that while yeah, it's not necessarily a good thing that so many claims got dismissed, especially without leave to amend, it's not quite the disaster that so many people seem to think that it is. Let's get into it. Okay, so as always, if you are new to this topic, I highly recommend first going to the playlist that is linked in the description below. We have talked about this case in tons of videos so far, and that's really the best way to get caught up. And if you're unfamiliar with the actual decisions by Judge Lyman in his order dismissing the Wayfarer party's case, as well as his reasoning for it, I'm also including a link to that specific video in the description as well. Otherwise, let's talk about the good that might actually come from this dismissal after we hear from this video's sponsor, of course. This video is sponsored by Midas Merge. Midas Merge is a Merge 3 game where players combine creatures and treasures strategically, completing quests and harnessing the sun's energy to dispel the darkness cast by Nyx, the goddess of night. In the game, you progress through levels and uncover rich lore and secrets hidden within the Gardens of Gold, helping Queen Leah and King Midas in their quest to illuminate the realm. It's free to download, ad-free, and has no dead ends. You don't need a Wi-Fi connection to play, so you can collect these adorable creatures anywhere, anytime. And if you're one of the first 100 people to download through my link or QR code, you'll receive a unique Mox Fox level 1. Not only is it adorable, but it also boosts your garden progress and will be personalized with this channel's name. Personally, I've been enjoying playing this at the end of the day when I'm either here at my desk or on the couch with Mr. Bytes, and I just need a little bit of me time to decompress from all the day's tasks and stressors. The artwork is super cute and the gameplay is actually really relaxing. So if you're looking for a new game filled with the cutest creatures and a great opportunity to decompress, click on the link in the description below to download Midas Merge for free. And thanks again to Midas Merge for sponsoring this video. Okay, let's get back to it. Okay, so to start out, in order to talk about whether this is a win or a loss, or how much of a win or how much of a loss, we first kind of need to talk about the goals of litigation. In every single case that is filed, each of the parties will have their goals for what they want out of resolution in this case. At least, in my opinion, they really should. It's the best way to ensure that as you go down this path, you are making decisions that ultimately you will be happy with at the end. A lot of times, this is as simple as, I want total victory with a verdict by a jury. I was wronged, or I'm being unfairly targeted, and I know I'm right, and I want the court to say so in black and white. To be honest, a lot of times that leads to a necessary conversation about maybe a tiered list of goals for the litigation, because as we know, in civil litigation, the likelihood of making it all the way to trial is pretty low. And that means there's a good chance the litigant doesn't get a total victory. But you know, as a litigator, sometimes I've had clients who have said, I really just want to be heard more than anything. Or they may have said something like, I honestly just kind of want to hear them say that they're sorry in some form or another. Or sometimes a party will come to the litigation feeling like they've just gone through an experience that was kind of traumatic and made them feel like they don't really have control over their life somehow. And they want to leave the litigation feeling like they've been able to retake that feeling in some form or another. So when we talk about the goals of litigation, there are material goals as well as emotional goals. And those goals are likely to be pretty unique to each individual who is participating in the litigation, and we don't necessarily know them unless we have a very personal one-on-one conversation with them. But aside from that, in cases like this one, we also have multiple battlefields for the litigation. And that, of course, means multiple arenas for these various goals to be achieved or not achieved. Of course, we talked about this many times before, but there's the court of law and there's the court of public opinion. And undoubtedly, both sides of this litigation have their ideas of what success looks like on both of these battlefields. Personally, I think that from my vantage point at the very least, Justin Baldoni seems to be the one who is winning the battle in the court of public opinion. If you think about it, how many people even knew who Justin Baldoni was before this whole controversy took place? For me personally, I think the first time I ever heard of him was last summer during the premiere when I saw people on social media starting to talk about rumors of drama on set for this movie. But now there's so much publicity around this case that a significantly greater number of people are much more familiar with him. And of the people that are invested in this case, it seems like by and large, the majority of them appear to side with Baldoni over Lively. And that seems to be the case even through this dismissal. So as far as the court of public opinion is concerned, it seems like his side of the story is still very much alive and well. And that can have an impact on him socially, on his career, etc. These are material ways that can really have an impact on his overall life. But obviously what people care about with regard to this specific dismissal is, of course, the impact it has in the court of law. And based on the statements Baldoni's lawyer, Brian Friedman, has made over the months since this whole debacle started, it seems like there are a few main litigation goals for the Wayfarer parties. Obviously, one of those is to have their claims and their side of the story heard in court, and then by extension, by the public at large. To a certain extent, that has been pretty successful so far. This litigation has given the Wayfarer parties the opportunity to share with the public a lot of evidence that already calls into question a lot of Blake Lively's claims. And considering the relative power dynamic between these two, she's incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful between her and Ryan Reynolds' successes in Hollywood. That's kind of a big deal in my opinion. And chief among those claims being called into question, of course, is the behind the scenes footage of the slow dance scene that Lively described in her original complaint and which she changed somewhat in her First Amended Complaint after the public release of this footage. Now, at the same time, it seems like one of the Wayfarer party's other main goals here is to actually get these issues placed in front of a jury at trial. And a public trial especially. There's definitely a part of this that could be coming from the knowledge that a lot of people have over what a very public trial can do for an aggrieved celebrity who has been allegedly wrongfully accused of something like Me Too claims. The most obvious example is Johnny Depp, of course. He was seemingly down and out for years in Hollywood after Amber Heard made those initial claims against him at the end of their marriage. But after the world was able to see for themselves the actual evidence in the case, all of that changed once again. And now he's back to doing what he wants to do with his career. And recent rumors are even ablaze that he could come back for a Pirates of the Caribbean 6. So in the same way, it's clear why someone like Justin Baldoni might want to see this go all the way to trial in some form, because it gives him the opportunity to allow in as much sunshine as possible as a disinfectant, if you will, so the public can decide for themselves as jurors in the court of public opinion. But aside from that, bringing this back to the dismissal, obviously, some of these claims for sure won't be making it to trial. But there still are a bunch of issues that are currently active between these parties that have the opportunity to be heard at trial. First of all, there's Blake Lively's case against Justin Baldoni. She has her sexual harassment, retaliation, and defamation claims, to name a few. Now, she could, of course, decide to withdraw her lawsuit. And if she did, this would eliminate Baldoni's opportunity to fully vindicate himself at trial on those issues. And just as an example, she has already withdrawn one or two of her claims recently. When faced with the prospect of needing to provide evidence of her mental health for the purposes of litigating her claim for intentional infliction of emotional distress, she instead opted to just drop the claim rather than sending over her discovery responses. As a side note, I will say that I did think that this was a bit baffling. It's one thing to voluntarily dismiss a claim because you learn through the discovery process that the evidence that's out there just doesn't measure up enough for you to continue with it. But remember, if you're the plaintiff, you are the one that is bringing those claims, and these are the type of claims specifically that Lively would have had access to information in order to evaluate those claims before bringing the lawsuit. And so going into it, she really should have been prepared to provide that evidence that she has in her actual or constructive possession in order to prove those claims. And so a number of possibilities could account for this move, but from my perspective, this signals a potential weakness in her overall case if she's not willing to put her money where her mouth is and instead will voluntarily dismiss the claim, which is really based on information that she would have had at the outset of the litigation, like I said. But anyway, so that claim is gone. And it's possible for her to dismiss the rest of the claims if she really wants to. But maybe she decides that she's just in too deep now and she needs to keep litigating. Like I mentioned, there's the sexual harassment and retaliation claims, and then there's also the new defamation claim. That one basically echoes Baldoni's original defamation claims against her, but obviously in the inverse. So if Baldoni is interested in a fight continuing so that the public can see everything laid out, you have it essentially in Lively's claims. But even if she decides to withdraw her entire case, Baldoni has an opportunity to file a second amended complaint to litigate the claims of breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, as well as tortious interference with contractual relations and prospective economic advantage. Wow, that's a mouthful. In the order dismissing Baldoni's initial claims, the judge gave essentially the recipe book for how to come back and cure all the defects for these two claims. In 132 pages, Judge Lyman laid out all the problems with Baldoni's allegations. And so what Baldoni's legal team needs to do is go through each one of these and, in a second amended complaint, re-allege the claims with more particularized details so that they can check off every single element of each of these claims so that they don't get dismissed again. If they can do that, then there is a good chance that this could go all the way to trial potentially, assuming that they don't, of course, settle it sooner than that. And also, here's another point about Baldoni's defamation claims that were dismissed here. One of his claims was that the communications between Lively and her team and with the press were also defamatory. But the problem was Baldoni and the Wayfarer parties didn't know what those communications even were. And that was a huge problem for the judge here and one reason why he dismissed the claim. However, when the parties are engaging in active discovery, they can also learn new information. So let's say, for example, that Baldoni's team requests all communications that Lively and her representatives had with the press about her sexual harassment allegations. That is totally fair game for discovery, even with the limitations placed on the Wayfarer parties' case. So if the Wayfarer parties are in fact correct and Lively worked with the New York Times extensively on their article, they can get all of those communications between them. And so then the Wayfarer parties are able to look at the actual statements and assess whether they think it's worthwhile to bring entirely new defamation claims based on new information they just received showing allegedly defamatory statements by Lively and her representatives. In other words, there could be an opportunity to bring a whole new defamation claim that's separate from the statements that were part of Baldoni's first amended complaint. Now, aside from that, let's also talk about some of the potential surprising benefits of this dismissal. Assuming, of course, that the second amended complaint is properly alleged, it would obviously be narrowed in scope in terms of the issues in this case. And honestly, this could potentially help everyone to focus more on certain specific issues. At the outset of this litigation, the sheer volume of allegations was so great that for a lot of people, it was actually kind of overwhelming. And as we look ahead to a potential jury trial, we need to think about how Baldoni's lawyers would bring this case to a jury. This involves, of course, telling the story of everything that happened and framing it into a narrative that they hope that the jury will find compelling. By narrowing the scope, they're able to ensure that the narrative they provide to the jury is perhaps more cohesive, trackable, and compelling. And so that could mean that there's a lower likelihood that the jury gets overwhelmed or even just lost in the weeds entirely. And also, that narrative now will likely focus less on Lively's workplace harassment allegations and more on her allegedly wrongful behavior during promotion, production, etc. So factually speaking, the scope of the evidence that Baldoni's side will be focusing on is definitely more limited, but in a way that I don't think actually guts his case. Instead, he's no longer going to be talking about the CRD complaint or the New York Times or any of those statements that followed the premiere of the film. And that's because the universe of facts that Baldoni really cares about now are essentially everything from Lively's entrance into the IEWU project up through the premiere of the film. And this means they can get more detailed and organized on these particular issues. For example, what were the agreements? What were her promises? What were her obligations? What were Wayfarer's rights under these agreements? What did she do wrong while filming, during the editing, leading up to promotion, etc.? Was she merely using tactics of quote-unquote hard bargaining, meaning using the advantages that you have within a relationship to negotiate a better position? Or was she doing things like going into a business relationship intending to prey on the other side of the agreement from the outset and modifying terms through things like fraud and duress? These can sometimes be very nuanced questions in cases like these. So narrowing the scope of what Baldoni has to prove actually could prove beneficial because it means his litigation resources could be more tailored to fighting over those more specific details. But there's actually even a more specific reason that I think in a weird way, there's a possible way for this dismissal to end up hurting Blake Lively's claims. It's admittedly somewhat hypothetical, so a bit of a grain of salt here, but it has to do with the so-called Van Zandt phantom subpoena issue, which I have not yet talked about on this channel, but now feels like a pretty good time to go over that. That'll be in the next video. But otherwise, I want to know what you think. Am I just coping here because I want to see this case played out to an ultimate conclusion? Or do you think that you can see some benefits to Baldoni's side if he and the Wayfarer parties can come back and successfully plead these claims in their second amended complaint? Also, thanks again to Midas Merge for sponsoring this video. If you haven't already, follow the link in the description below to download this super cute and relaxing game. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you would hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more coverage of crazy cases and interesting legal topics, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is out there. And if you're really enjoying the content and you want to know how to best support the channel, consider becoming a member of Byte Club. You can join either through YouTube memberships or by becoming a supporter on Patreon. Links to both are in the description below. Otherwise, see you in the next one.